So Will Howard and Kurtis Rourke are two of the most efficient quarterbacks in college football, and they're two of the three potential candidates for Big Ten Quarterback of the Year, the other one being Dillon Gabriel out of Oregon. I'm Steven, that's Andrew, and that's Stefan. Ohio State and Indiana play each other, and just as we all thought, a top 5 matchup for a chance to get to Indianapolis for the Big Ten championship game on the line. But Stefan, I think something else is on the line a little bit. We know Travis Hunter is going to win the Heisman Trophy. That's a given. I think he is the only Vitamin Ink Heisman Trophy finalist right now where things stand. Could Kurtis Rourke or Will Howard come out of this game and throw their name in the hat as a legitimate case to get to New York this year?
Yeah, I think so. I think the case is probably better for Kurtis Rourke just because if Indiana wins, I think the magnitude of how that win is going to be talked about and the potential for Indiana to be the number 1 team in the country if they win this game would be there. But I think it's a moment for Will Howard, too, that can stand out, right? If he gets a top 5 win at home and kind of produces one of those, legendary performances where maybe, we talk so much about how he doesn't have to be Superman, he doesn't have to put up incredible stats, but if he does, you immediately start having that conversation, mainly for the reason of what you mentioned of Travis Hunter is going to be in New York and he's probably going to win. And then Ashton Jeanty, maybe you can pencil him in, but outside of that, it's an open conversation. I don't think Dillon Gabriel or Cam Ward are necessarily having a year where you're like, no doubt, like they're going to New York, even if they're not going to win the trophy at the end of the day. So yeah, I think Kurtis Rourke, Will Howard, both have an opportunity in this game. It's a top 5 matchup on Fox. There's going to be eyes on it. There's going to be a lot of people trying to figure out how good is Indiana. There's going to be some people watching saying, is Ohio State that team that is no doubt, up there with Oregon as the 1-2 in the country. People are going to be watching this game closely, and if one of these quarterbacks has a big performance, a lot of Heisman voters are going to see that and say, I'm looking at his stats, and this guy's actually having a pretty good year, maybe kind of quietly, and boom, there's that game, there's that moment that kind of projects you into that next level, and you end up making a trip to New York.
Andrew, Will Howard, Heisman Trophy candidate?
I think it's an easier path for Kurtis Rourke. Like, I think Stefan's right. I think it's an easier path for Rourke if Indiana wins to kind of have that either moment or have that kind of notoriety, attention that comes with it, because I think the path for victory for Indiana is that Kurtis Rourke has to play well. If Kurtis Rourke does not play well, I mean, we might be talking blowout. Like, I don't think anybody's going to sit here and say Indiana can play in that game. If Will Howard doesn't play well, Ohio State can still win the game. And I think we can all have that conversation of, look, we just saw it at Penn State through a pick 6, fumbled through the back of the end zone, handed Penn State 14 points, and Ohio State still won the game because they could run the ball well, because their defense played well, because their defense stepped up in big-time moments. Ohio State has that ability. I don't know if Indiana has that ability. So I think if Kurtis Rourke comes into Columbus and wins the game, he absolutely needs to be kind of in that Heisman conversation. The other thing with Will Howard, too, is let's say Will Howard comes out and they do to Michigan, let's just get hyperbolic and let's just say they do what they did to Michigan State a couple of years ago, where it's like, oh my goodness, they just blew these guys out of the water. Like, this is crazy. Like, this is a blowout. I know the line was like 12 points, but wow, they really look dominant. Ohio State, maybe they're better than Oregon now. Like, all those conversations are being had. What if Will Howard throws for like 280 yards, 300 yards passing, runs for 40 more? We could be like, yeah, that's great. What if Jeremiah Smith has like a 12-catch, 140-yard performance for 2 touchdowns with a one-handed snag in the back of the end zone, which isn't crazy because we've seen him do that before. I wonder if Will Howard is going to get all of that praise, all of that shine, all of that notoriety if Ohio State does beat Indiana, even if they beat them up pretty good. I think Kurtis Rourke has the easier path to getting there just because of that. Not saying Will Howard shouldn't, not saying it's impossible. I just think that there are more barriers to that for Will Howard than there are for Kurtis Rourke. So I think, yes, you could absolutely say that, because I think right now you're talking about Travis Hunter, Ashton Jeanty. I'm putting Gabriel in that mix. I know you said, you're not going to put him down. I'm writing him down in pencil. He's the number 1 quarterback on a pass-happy team that's going to go 12-0. That's a lot of times good enough to get you to New York. So I'm going to put him in that mix, and I think maybe the quarterback of the winning team here has a pretty decent shot to get to New York. But I think it's just easier if it's Kurtis Rourke, not Will Howard.
I don't think the Big Ten is getting 2 quarterbacks in New York. That's kind of the point here. Sure, I don't have Dillon Gabriel penciled in because he's going to have to play one of these 2 again in Indianapolis. So what you're talking about here with Kurtis Rourke is he comes to Columbus, he gets a win here. They win against Purdue in a blowout fashion, and then he goes to Indianapolis and plays Dillon Gabriel. One of those 2 is getting to New York. Will Howard knocks off Indiana. Then he gets revenge on Michigan, and then he gets to Indianapolis. One of those two is going to New York. I don't see a world where the Big Ten gets two quarterbacks. There's just other candidates going around college football. Shedeur Sanders has a case to get to New York at this point. So I just don't see the Big Ten getting more than one quarterback. And the good thing is all these guys have to play each other for essentially that spot.
Well, just real quick, Knicks and Penix were finalists last year.
This is a different year.
I know, but they played each other in the regular season in the conference championship game. So I don't know if it has to do with the conference getting, two quarterbacks in, because we just saw it last year. I think, if you want to say that there's other candidates, maybe, but I don't know if it has anything to do with, the conference is just, they're not going to get two in.
I said that because they're both in the same conference. Last year, there were not that many Heisman Trophy candidates. So what you ended up with is a wide receiver who was the only option on his offense because a lot of his other guys were hurt. Two guys from the same conference, and the guy who won the award simply because his stats were good, even though they had 2 or 3 losses for LSU last year. Last year was not a good year for Heisman Trophy candidates. So what happened last year doesn't apply to this year. I think there are more candidates across the board this year for guys. I think it's more likely you get 2 guys from one team, especially if you're talking about a Colorado team. I'm not going to make cases for other people. Here's my actual point. I don't think that game for Jeremiah Smith is going to happen on Saturday because we have not seen that game. Yes, we've seen moments that, as we talked about last week when we did a whole pod about the best versions of wide receivers, he's just consistent, which means I'm expecting 5 catches for anywhere from 90 to 110 yards and a touchdown. But also, you know who else can do that? Emeka Egbuka, Carnell Tate, Quinshon Judkins, Travion Henderson. That's why I picked Will Howard to win the Heisman in the preseason. It's not about him being the best player on his team. I don't think he's the best player on his team. But when you have that much, you just go quarterback. That's just kind of what happens because he gets all those stats. I think it's the same thing for Kurtis Rourke, though I think Kurtis Rourke does, to your point and to your point, Kurtis Rourke and Indiana have to play an A-level game to win on Saturday. Will Howard and Ohio State don't. But I think that doesn't matter at this point. This is the biggest game of the week. Everybody's going to be watching at noon, which Will Howard knows, but you got to be loud anyway. And I think one of these 2 candidates is going to come out of this game, whoever wins, as a legitimate Heisman Trophy candidate, because it just doesn't feel like people have been paying attention to them much until this week. Get the text 614-350-3315. 2-week free trial, $3.99 after that. We'll continue to have this conversation on Buckeye Talk. Steven, Stefan, Andrew, potential Heisman Trophy candidate in the building. See you later.